If you love great stories, you've come to the right place. Subscribe to my channel to make sure you don't miss any new videos. Like and share this video with your friends if you enjoyed it, and let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Luke arrived at a bar that was far from the center of Jericho. The building had a worn-out wooden facade with two swinging doors, the classic kind from old Western saloons, barely hanging from their rusty hinges. A faint light filtered through the dirty windows, signaling that the place was open. Am I in the Wild West? Luke thought as he walked toward the entrance. He pushed the doors, which creaked loudly. Upon entering, he could see the inside of the bar. It wasn't huge. The floor was made of old wood that creaked underfoot. There were a couple of dirty circular tables with their respective chairs. Only one table was being used by 5 people who were playing poker, smoking, and drinking alcohol. At the very back was the bar with stools to sit on and order a drink from the bartender, who was wiping a glass with a rag that seemed to be making it dirtier rather than cleaning it. The 6 adults, with their fierce looks and outcast appearances, turned their heads and looked at Luke. They thought they'd find some of their late-arriving colleagues, but instead, they saw a kid who could have been anyone's son. Luke kept a stoic expression as he walked steadily toward the bar. Sitting on a stool, he raised some dust and looked at the bartender, who had frozen in place, staring at him with a confused expression. The others were just as confused, so they had fallen silent. What was a high school kid doing in this bar so far from the center of Jericho? "A little sake," Luke said, breaking the silence and tapping the bar as he got lost in his thoughts. "We don't serve brats here. Go back to your parents," the bartender growled, his voice rough and raspy. It would be bad for his rundown bar to get into trouble with the authorities because a teenager showed up there. "Aren't you that writer?" A bald man, who had started to get up from his chair and walk toward Luke, fell unconscious before he could finish his sentence. "Sleep," Luke thought. The other 4 men at the table fell asleep in their seats. The bartender was startled by this, but before he could react, he realized he was losing control over his body and thoughts. "Sake," Luke repeated. Of course, he was using mind control on these normies. "I don't have sake. I can offer you whiskey, rum, tequila, or vodka," the bartender replied in a monotone voice, his gaze blank. "What do you recommend, old man?" Luke asked, looking at Edgar, who was floating beside him. "Vodka," Edgar answered without hesitation. "I'm surprised you haven't tried alcohol until now," Edgar added, shaking his head. He had witnessed several invitations to secret parties at Nevermore that Luke had turned down. "Do you want me to get drunk and be an easier target to kill? I would have been an easy target for Sabrina last year," Luke said. "Whatever, just order the vodka," Edgar replied, and Luke ordered it from the bartender, who placed small shot glasses in a horizontal line. Then he took out a glass bottle with a clear liquid and poured the vodka into each of the small glasses. After serving the alcohol, the bartender stood still, saying nothing, waiting for Luke's orders as he stared at the shot glasses. Luke picked one up and drank it. He tasted the vodka. A very bad idea. A look of disgust appeared on his face, making Edgar laugh. "Don't taste the vodka. It's probably cheap, so it must have a stronger taste," Edgar said, laughing. "You could have said that earlier. How many of these will it take to get me drunk?" Luke asked curiously. He had never been drunk in his life. He didn't know what the effect would be like. "As an outcast, you're more resistant to alcohol, but you're not immune. It's hard to say for sure. Just keep drinking," Edgar responded, and Luke continued drinking vodka in silence, while in his mind he had a major debate. Wednesday or Enid, that's the question. Polygamy isn't an option for several reasons. First, Luke wouldn't like having 2 girlfriends. It would be strange for him, and he wouldn't be able to handle taking care of 2. Second, there's Enid and Wednesday. Luke is almost certain that neither of the 2 girls would accept polygamy. Enid is jealous and territorial. She's shown that many times. As for Wednesday, although she hasn't openly shown jealousy, she has expressed some anger toward the promise Luke has with Enid. Besides, Wednesday is a narcissist. Luke thinks her narcissism surpasses his own. She would never accept sharing anything or anyone. She grew up with two loving parents who have a monogamous relationship. After all, polygamy in the outcast society is used for offspring, not for true love. They're not living in a high school romance harem anime. While thinking about these things, he finished all the vodka-filled shot glasses. He glanced at the shelf full of alcohol bottles. A bottle labeled whiskey caught his attention. With a slight motion of his hand, one of the small glasses disappeared, replaced by the whiskey bottle. Shambles, a very convenient technique, Luke thought with a satisfied smile as he looked at the whiskey bottle in front of him. He never thought he could replicate the shambles technique, used by Law in One Piece. To replicate this technique, Luke used his white and yellow aura. By expanding his domain, Luke essentially replicates Law's room. He can sense the presence of others and objects even without seeing them with his eyes. Once his domain is expanded, he uses a technique called clairvoyant sensitivity. This is the primary technique of clairvoyance, which gives him the ability to feel the texture of objects he examines, even probing them to identify the material of the object. He must choose two objects using this technique, allowing him to have precise control over the space and the two objects he selected. The final step is to use telekinesis for the exchange of positions between objects. With a clear understanding of the layout, thanks to clairvoyance, he can instantly move an object from its current location to a new one, while the object in the other position moves to the original spot. This is also applicable to humans. Luke had used this technique to dodge Atlas's final charge by swapping places with a small leaf. Now he had his teleportation technique, although he still needed more practice for it to feel like actual teleportation. With his 20-kilometer domain, he could potentially teleport over great distances in the future, but it's more difficult when the objects are farther apart. Just as Luke was about to grab the bottle to pour himself some shots of whiskey, a hairy hand beat him to it. Confused, he looked at the bartender, who was now moving on his own, even though Luke hadn't given him any orders. The bartender was a burly man with a large belly. He had a scruffy beard, and his hands were hairy. The bartender opened the bottle with surprising skill, and as he did, Luke felt a familiar presence. The man's voice sounded more firm and confident than he remembered. "I see you're divided, caught between two dilemmas," said the bartender with a crooked smile as he filled Luke's glass. Did my mind control wear off? Luke thought. He instantly noticed that the chatty ghost of his grandfather had vanished. An idea crossed his mind. Could Edgar be controlling the bartender? "I didn't know you could control normies. Feels like something out of The Exorcist," Luke commented. Edgar, in the bartender's body, poured Luke a drink and took one for himself. "An old-school trick, kid. And speaking of that, let's get back to the point. You're overcomplicating this whole love thing." "It's more complicated than you think," Luke said with a sigh. Edgar, still in the bartender's body, raised an eyebrow as he poured himself another drink, a mischievous smile on his face. "Here's my first piece of advice. Why limit yourself to choosing between one or the other? If you like both, why not keep both?" he said, bringing the glass to his lips without hesitation. "The Poe family will thrive if you have two such talented wives. A pure lineage of a werewolf and a talented psychic like you who possesses two auras. You could convince them if they both like you. Don't get stuck in a decision that has an easy solution," Edgar added with a playful grin. "I know what you're trying to do, old man, but I hate to break it to you, that's not going to work. So thanks, but no, I don't want two girlfriends. That's just not for me," Luke said, taking the glass and tasting the whiskey for the first time. Once he finished, he gestured for Edgar to pour him another. Edgar let out a hearty laugh but didn't seem bothered. "I see I won't convince you to take that route. Fine, if that's what you want," he said with a shrug, pouring himself another drink and refilling Luke's glass. "Now, if we're discarding that option, the question is, which one are you going to choose? I think the answer is pretty obvious, don't you?" Luke leaned back in his seat, pretending to focus deeply, placing his hands on his forehead in an exaggerated gesture, as if trying to read Edgar's mind. "Let me guess your thoughts," he said theatrically. "You, Want me to choose Wednesday, right? Edgar nodded with a smile, amused by his great-great-grandson's little performance. Luke slapped the bar, satisfied with himself. I didn't even have to use my blue aura. Maybe I should become a fortune teller, he joked before downing another shot of whiskey. It seemed the alcohol was already affecting his behavior. Edgar laughed at Luke's antics and poured more whiskey into both of their glasses. Wednesday understands you better than anyone, you know that. She's like you. You're not afraid of her and she's not afraid of you. With her, you can be yourself. Always, Edgar said. Luke set the glass down on the bar, staring at the golden liquid. Edgar was right, and he knew it. With Enid, he had always been afraid to show his darker side, so to speak, though he didn't really think of it as that dark. He was only like that with his enemies. It's not like he was a psychopath or a serial killer. With Wednesday, I don't have to pretend. She accepts me as I am, darkness and all, but Enid. She showed me a side of myself I didn't know. She made me feel more human, I guess, Luke said, slowly turning the glass in his hands. Edgar tilted his head, his gaze becoming more inquisitive. And which side do you prefer, Luke? The one that embraces you for who you are, or the one that forces you to be something you may not be able to maintain? Luke frowned. He remembered the scared look in Enid's eyes on the night of the lunar eclipse. At that moment, he felt like a bond between them had broken. Enid had taken a couple of days to contact him again, perhaps thinking of canceling their promise or something similar. Enid had been his first crush, the first person who made him feel something beyond the loneliness that had always surrounded him. That's why it was so hard for him to let her go. But deep down, he knew something had changed between them, something he couldn't fix. He couldn't forget the way she looked at him that night, with fear, as if he were something dangerous. The decision is made, Luke thought firmly, downing the glass in one swift motion. His expression returned to normal, free from the earlier worry. In that moment, he felt as if a weight had been lifted off his shoulders, a release that brought unexpected relief. It looks like you've made a decision, Edgar said, watching Luke's face. Yeah, want to know what it is? Luke asked with a slight smile, knowing that Edgar was dying of curiosity. No need. I'll see it on the front page soon enough, Edgar replied, shaking his head. He didn't know exactly what decision Luke had made, but whatever it was, Edgar would be fine with it. He only wanted to help his descendant. Of course, Edgar had a more favorable opinion of Wednesday, but he had been honest in their conversation. He hadn't just thought about the Poe lineage or the optimal resurgence of their fallen family. He had given his honest opinion. He had observed Luke with both Enid and Wednesday, and he believed his descendant was happier and more genuine with the Gothic girl. Thanks for the talk, Luke said with some difficulty. This conversation had been very good for him. It's nothing. Luckily, we managed to solve the problem before this body reached its limit, Edgar said as he exited the normie's body, which had turned a sickly pale color. The bartender collapsed to the floor, his face resembling that of a terminal patient, trembling. Hey, don't bring me any more problems, Luke thought, peering over the bar to check on the bartender. The best thing to do was to get out quickly, after erasing the memories of these normies. Wednesday Addams calmly opened her eyes, just like every other morning. It's today. That was her first thought as she robotically got out of bed and checked the time, 6 in the morning. There was still an hour and a half before the first class period started. She had woken up earlier than usual. Normally, she woke up at 6:30 a.m. The reason for this change was a thought that had been lingering in her mind for almost 2 days. A thought about Luke and the decision he would make. Would he keep his promise and return to Enid, or would he choose her? The answer should be obvious. She was better than Enid in every way. Why would Luke hesitate in his choice? Just thinking about these things annoyed her. What annoyed her even more was that she was getting angry and affected by her emotions. She only has an advantage because she got there first, Wednesday told herself, glancing at Enid, who was still sleeping in the other bed in their dorm room. After staring at her silently for several seconds, she looked away and began her morning routine. She hadn't managed to befriend her roommate, and the only friend she had made was Eugene, whom she saw as a younger brother. The school year was almost over. That's what she was waiting for. The only unusual thing was Luke. Even with Enid, their relationship had stagnated lately, and the usually cheerful girl had stopped trying to befriend her. The reason was obvious. 30 minutes before classes started, Enid woke up. She and Wednesday exchanged glances, but neither said a word. They continued with their own routines in silence. There was an invisible tension in the room. Each of them went to class on their own. Wednesday was distracted throughout the entire class. The lessons were tedious as the final exams were approaching, but this had never happened to her before. Her eyes kept drifting toward the round clock and then to Luke, who was sitting about 3 desks away. Looking sleepy as always. He must have stayed up all night, though today it's much worse than usual, Wednesday thought, examining Luke's face. Luke was experiencing his first hangover. A headache, drowsiness, and having to listen to a teacher talk about boring things. It was too much. He shouldn't have had so much vodka and whiskey the night before. He had overestimated his outcast metabolism. 2. If she thought about it, that's one of the few differences she had with Luke. She had a routine every day. Luke, on the other hand, wasn't the type to structure his days. However, she liked staying up late. She was a night person, but during the school period, she changed her routine to optimize her time. During vacations, she returned to her nocturnal habits. At noon, they had a long break that lasted an hour. All the students headed to the cafeteria to buy lunch and eat there. Wednesday noticed that Luke was heading in a different direction. He didn't go to the cafeteria. Enid also wasn't there, eating lunch with her friends. They must be talking about the promise, Wednesday easily deduced. Her expression remained the same as she ate slowly, but she felt something strange inside. Was this nerves? Was she feeling nervous for the first time? Luke found himself standing in front of Enid in a deserted hallway where almost no students ever passed by. Since she had defeated the Hyde, Luke told her the whole truth about why he ended their relationship. On one hand, it was because of his enemies, who could use her as a hostage again and threaten him. However, the key reason for Luke's decision was Enid's mother. Esther had pushed Luke to break up with Enid. Luke told her exactly what Esther had said. "This time she's crossed the line," Enid said, frowning, staring at the floor deep in thought, her fists clenched. She couldn't believe her mother would meddle so much in her affairs. The hallway fell silent as Enid thought, until she lifted her gaze, and her eyes met Luke's. "So I was right. You left me because of your enemies, although I didn't know about my mother," Enid said. "Yes," Luke replied, nodding. "So we should get back together," Enid added in a low voice, avoiding eye contact with Luke. "You don't sound very sure," Luke said, and Enid abruptly lifted her head to look at him. "That's not it," she quickly said, raising her hands and gesturing wildly. "It's just that so much has happened since the promise. My feelings are a mess right now." "It's okay, Enid," Luke interrupted, hopping to stop her from justifying herself further. He wasn't upset with her. "I won't be keeping the promise," Luke said, getting straight to the point. He had always been a direct person. There was no point in dragging things out. Why?" Enid asked, confused. "Is it because of Wednesday?" she asked again, not giving Luke a chance to answer the first question. "I won't deny she's part of it, but she's not the main reason," Luke answered honestly. "Then what is it?" "I don't want my girlfriend to look at me with fear," Luke replied bluntly. That was the reason he wouldn't keep his promise to Enid. It was true that he had fallen for Wednesday, but even if the goth girl hadn't been there, Luke would have come to the same conclusion. He didn't want the person he loved to be afraid of any part of his personality. Though Wednesday's arrival had made it easier for him to let Enid go and reach that realization. "It wasn't my intention. I was shocked when I saw Sabrina and then when you killed her like that," Enid said, looking down, recalling the night of the lunar eclipse. "I don't blame you. Everyone has their own values and limits of what they can handle," Luke said with a slightly strange expression. He was only being this understanding because it was Enid. I can change. I've always been sensitive to these things. If my brothers and the other outcasts can handle it, I can too. If it's for you, Enid said, her eyes brimming with tears that could spill at any moment. No, Enid, that wouldn't be right. There's nothing wrong with you being the way you are and me being the way I am. We just don't match. I would kill my enemies without hesitation, while you would forgive them like you did with the hide, Luke said, shaking his head. For Enid to change would be difficult, and it would only prolong the relationship a bit longer than expected. Another example was when Enid wanted Wednesday not to kill Rowan, despite witnessing Rowan trying to kill her. Luke wouldn't even hesitate against such enemies. He would kill anyone who tried to kill him, even if they weren't part of the Spellmans. Wednesday was the same, and many veteran outcasts thought that way. The new generation was different, maybe because of how closely connected they were to the normie society through technology and social media. And besides, I like Wednesday now, Luke said with tremendous difficulty. He wanted to make things clear. He didn't want Enid to find out later about his relationship with Wednesday if they ever officially started dating. I'm sorry for deceiving you. It wasn't something I could control despite our promise, Luke said, sincerely apologizing. His plan wasn't to fall in love with Wednesday while he had the promise with Enid. It just happened. What Luke didn't realize was that this was the last straw for Enid. So I trained like crazy for nothing. I fought to the death against a drugged-up hide for nothing, Enid said, her frown deepening as her voice grew louder. And while I was giving it my all, you were falling in love with Wednesday Addams, she yelled in fury, grabbing Luke's tie with immense strength and yanking him roughly toward her. Luke looked at Enid, her face just inches from his. Her expression was pure rage and her grip was powerful. He had never seen her so angry, and she wasn't wrong. He had no excuses for her accusations. Everything she said was true. He had kissed Wednesday for the first time while Enid was just a door away, and then he continued seeing the goth girl, occasionally kissing her, all while the promise was still in effect. Answer me, Luke, Enid demanded, her voice trembling with fury, pulling him even closer until he was practically suffocating. What do you want me to say? I've already apologized. I can't change the past, Luke said in a calm tone, looking Enid straight in the eyes. At least you got your werewolf transformation much earlier. You won't be an outcast in your pack, Luke added. He had always known this was a big concern for Enid. She feared being exiled from her pack and cared deeply about others' opinions, especially her mother's. Now, she no longer had to worry about that. She'd be considered a prodigy. Enid let go of the tie abruptly, but the fury in her eyes remained. Before Luke could say anything else, she slapped him, the sound of her palm echoing against his cheek. You're a damn bastard, Enid shouted, her voice a mix of rage and pain. I deserved that, Luke thought, feeling the sting on his cheek. How could you fall in love with someone else while I was doing all of this for us? Enid asked, her multicolored nails transforming into sharp claws. Okay, it won't go that far, right? Luke thought, eyeing the claws cautiously. He didn't want his face to be scarred. People don't choose when to fall in love. It just happens. It wasn't my intention, it just happened. Luke repeated what he had said earlier. Besides, the main reason he chose Wednesday was that she accepted him for who he truly was and didn't look at him with fear like Enid had on the night of the blood moon. You're a bastard and a womanizer who doesn't keep his word, Luke, Enid said in a whisper, her voice filled with a mix of disappointment, sadness, and anger. Luke frowned, hurt by her words. Maybe I am, he said calmly. He knew who he was, and although it pained him to have hurt her, he had already apologized sincerely. Enid stood in silence, her fists trembling with anger. I wish I had never met you, she finally said, her voice breaking. She turned and quickly walked away. Luke watched her back until she disappeared from sight. Then, he sat down on the floor, leaning against the wall, and sighed. Damn it, it's better to just train and play video games, he muttered. The day wasn't even over yet. He still had his talk with Wednesday. Would the Gothic girl agree to be his official girlfriend? From their last conversation in the cafeteria, it seemed like she was willing, but it was hard to read her expression. If she rejects me, I'll be alone. Well, maybe that's for the best, Luke thought as he stood up and walked toward his next task. Luckily, his next class was psychic powers, so he didn't run into Enid. The odd thing was that, in that class, he sat next to Wednesday. Both stayed silent, listening to the professor's lesson. They worked on the assignment together, but without discussing anything else. When the class ended, they had a short 10-minute break. Then another hour-long class, and during the break, they headed to a place where they could talk without being disturbed. It was already 2:15 in the afternoon, which meant 48 hours had passed. In less than 10 minutes, the last class starts. Let's finish this quickly, Wednesday said, stopping in a dimly lit hallway and staring intently at Luke. She tried to sound as indifferent as usual, but she was eager to hear Luke's answer. She had been distracted all day, and finally, after this, she could return to normal. Although Luke didn't know this, since it was very difficult to tell if Wednesday was affected by anything or not. My relationship with Enid is over. I canceled the promise, Luke said, making a dismissive gesture with his hand as if downplaying its importance. He, too, wanted to appear as indifferent as possible. Is it really over, or are you going to make another promise? Wednesday asked, raising an eyebrow. She felt the nerves she had been experiencing slowly start to fade. It's definitely over. I think this might give you a clue, Luke replied, pointing to his right cheek, which was still red from the slap Enid had given him a few hours earlier. She hit him, Wednesday thought, frowning slightly as she noticed Luke's reddened cheek. She felt relieved by his response, but also a little angry. After that, both of them fell silent, just staring at each other. Neither knew how to proceed. So what now? Wednesday asked, breaking the silence. I don't know. Do we just go back to how things were? Luke asked. How they were? Wednesday questioned. You know, kissing and stuff, Luke replied with an awkward expression. Vulnerability was something he wasn't good at, and the idea of expressing himself felt almost insulting. He'd already gone through enough with Enid just recently. Should he ask Wednesday to start dating him officially? Of course, he wasn't going to do that. It would only earn him her mockery, and he didn't want that either. Be more specific, Wednesday said. Why do I always have to be the one to clarify things? If you want something specific, then say it yourself, Luke complained. Normal acquaintances don't go around kissing and doing that stuff, Wednesday replied, mimicking Luke's tone in the last words. Respond, but don't mock me, Luke thought, rolling his eyes. A relationship, I guess, Luke finally said, and Wednesday nodded. Are you okay with that? I thought you hated anything considered normal, Luke said, noticing her agreement. I don't hate it. Couples who constantly fight and need to reaffirm their love every minute seem pathetic to me, Wednesday replied. Her disdain was clear, but there was more in her words. A subtle critique of the emotional dependency she observed in typical relationships. Luke couldn't agree more. And that whole thing of being glued together all the time, like they're Siamese twins. I don't know how they can stand that lack of independence, Wednesday added with a slight grimace of disgust. True, we should set some rules so we don't end up doing those stupid things, Luke agreed. Both of them were loners who enjoyed their solitude. Neither wanted to be together 24/7. We will, but we'll discuss it later. We need to get back to class, Wednesday said, and they both started walking toward the classroom in silence, a comfortable silence with no need for words. One more thing, she added as they walked without stopping. What? The relationship is monogamous, Wednesday replied, her tone not one of a request but a clarification. Yeah, sure, Luke said, initially not giving it much importance, but then catching the meaning of her statement. He paused for a second and understood that any deviation from that expectation would be unforgivable. Though both were too proud to admit it, there was a mutual instinct of possession they wouldn't accept sharing with anyone else. They continued walking, not saying anything more. They both understood the rules, without the need for additional words. I swear on my cat that I tried to go the polygamy route. To me, it seems logical that it would be accepted among the marginalized, particularly for issues of lineage. Initially, I even imagined Luke ending up with both Enid and Wednesday before the vote I took. But looking at Enid's and Wednesday's personalities, it feels very unrealistic that they would agree to share Luke, no matter how close their friendship. Wednesday grew up with parents in a monogamous relationship, and the same goes for Enid. I read somewhere that wolves are particularly loyal, where a male and female mate for life. As for Luke, he might have tried to convince them both to be in a polygamous relationship out of selfishness, but his personality isn't social enough to handle having two girlfriends and needing to give both love and attention. So, for those who wanted a monogamous relationship, perfect, no harem. Elliot Spellman, the current patriarch of the ancient and powerful psychic family, knelt with sweat on his forehead, staring intently at the stone floor. A few meters ahead, ascending a set of steps, was a figure seated on an old-looking throne. Due to the dim lighting in the room, the person's face was barely visible. Their eyes were light blue, and they gazed at Elliot with disdain. "A mission," said the figure seated on the throne, breaking the oppressive silence of the room. His voice echoed, monotone and totally devoid of emotion. "You only had to complete one mission, and you failed. Not only that, but your daughter and son died. Your most loyal servant met the same fate. On top of that, the family suffered a major blow because Luke Poe gathered undeniable evidence, and you didn't even notice it," the figure continued. Their tone sounded neither angry nor mocking. It expressed no emotion at all. "I'm terribly sorry, Patriarch Edward," exclaimed Elliot, his voice filled with respect and fear toward the figure on the throne. He forcefully struck his head against the cold, cobblestone floor. The dull thud echoed through the room, and a bit of blood trickled from Elliot's forehead, staining the floor. For most outcasts, it would be strange to see Elliot calling someone else patriarch when he is the head of the Spellman family. Even more shocking would be hearing the name Elliot had spoken. The name Elliot said was Edward Spellman, a man who, for the entire outcast community, should be dead. However, he is the true leader of the Spellman family, controlling everything from the shadows. "I told you it was a priority to eliminate Luke Poe, but you failed spectacularly, and the boy is still breathing. You launched a large-scale attack on Nevermore. I know I said the consequences didn't matter, but I didn't expect an attack of this magnitude." "Why?" asked Edward. "In the end, it would have been more effective for Atlas and the others to conduct a nighttime raid on Nevermore targeting Luke, or to ambush him when he left Nevermore. They might have been discovered and implicated innocents, whether normies or outcasts, yes, but they could have killed the boy. The consequences would have been less severe compared to the large-scale assault that Atlas and the others carried out at Nevermore." Elliot hesitated, unsure how to answer. "I learned that Crackstone's crypt holds the demonic book he used. A major distraction was needed so that Atlas and the others could operate freely on Nevermore's grounds," Elliot answered, deciding to tell the truth. He knew it was useless to lie to Edward, the most powerful psychic. "The Book of SAGA," Edward said slowly, and Elliot nodded. "You disobeyed my order to get the Book of SAGA and keep it for yourself. You are a very loyal follower, Elliot," Edward added sarcastically. "That's not true, Patriarch," Elliot said nervously. "Silence," Edward commanded, and Elliot immediately closed his mouth. He began to feel an icy chill. Frost started to form on the floor near him, reaching his hands and quickly creeping up his arms. The cold was extreme. He had never felt such an intense chill. If it continued, he could freeze to death, whether he resisted with his fire aura or not. "You're nearing 40 and already crave a demonic book to increase your powers. You're impatient. You're not ready yet. Your father made a pact shortly after you were born. He was 90. Be patient," said Edward. "It's true, Patriarch. I'm impatient. I will follow your advice," Elliot replied, avoiding eye contact and speaking in a servile tone. "You don't even have descendants now. If you gain demonic powers, it will be even harder for you to have new children. Your younger brother has 2 talented daughters, though they don't match your late daughter who had 2 auras. What a shame the family lost a dual aura user because of your greed," said Edward, shaking his head slightly. Elliot remained silent, It was best to say nothing. Excuses would be pointless. You've made two major mistakes since you took the position of patriarch. First, you were unaware of Luke Poe's birth, the source of our troubles, and now this. Perhaps your brother would be better suited as patriarch, Edward said, narrowing his eyes at Elliot. Give me another chance, patriarch. This time I will act personally and eliminate Luke Poe. I won't let anything distract me, Elliot said with determination. Edward remained silent until he finally spoke. Very well, but if you fail again, losing the position of patriarch won't be the only thing at stake. Elliot felt a shiver run down his spine, but he said nothing and merely nodded obediently. The boy has special protection now. We can't set foot in Nevermore to attack him. Any assassination attempt against him will bring punishment to the family. Doesn't that matter? Elliot asked with some uncertainty. He didn't want to bring more punishments upon the family. If you kill him at Nevermore without involving third parties, the punishment is manageable. As long as you don't launch a destructive-scale attack, we can handle the consequences. Do not kill any students or teachers, Edward replied. As you command, said Elliot. With permission granted, he could act without fear of potential punishment. Although he had to focus solely on Luke Poe and avoid involving others, which could pose problems if the boy had any support. Any news of the maid? Edward asked, referring to the only servant of the Poe family, the one who hid Luke Poe as a baby and cared for him without their knowledge. Natasha. The Kyria clan is hunting her down. She'll soon be our prisoner. She must be exhausted from the pursuit by now, Elliot replied. Oh, that clan of half-bloods accepted the request, Edward asked with mild interest. The Kyria clan is a group of half-bloods exiled from their families. To make a living, they accept less than legitimate requests, such as assassinations, theft of dark artifacts, trafficking of dangerous creatures, and other shady dealings. In Edward's time, that clan existed, but they didn't accept the Spellman's request to hunt down the Poes. This was mainly because they didn't want to earn the ire of a powerful psychic family like the Poes. However, the Poes were no longer what they once were. Now, only a 15-year-old boy bore the name, and then there was his servant. They no longer fear the name of an almost extinct family. I have to admit, they're experts at tracking people. With their help, we'll be able to capture the servant before she reaches Nevermore, said Elliot. Good. Did they find out why she moved so far away from Luke Poe? Edward asked. It wasn't normal for Natasha to be separated from Luke for so long. She must have a goal. No, but once they bring her here, we'll find out, Elliot said, beads of sweat forming on his forehead. Edward snorted lightly at Elliot's uselessness and ordered him to leave, which Elliot gratefully did. The Book of SAGA, Edward murmured, his expression thoughtful. Luke was gazing up at the blue sky, sitting on the grass under the shade of a large tree. A short distance away, Wednesday sat with her back straight, reading a small book. Both were silent. Only the soft breeze and the sounds of nature could be heard. They had found a small, secluded spot near the building where Wednesday attended her beekeeping club meetings. They had been sitting in silence for over 30 minutes, Wednesday reading without lifting her eyes from her book, and Luke staring at the sky, lost in his own thoughts. After a few more minutes, Wednesday closed her book and looked at Luke, who seemed like a statue. A few days ago, they had made their relationship official, becoming what society would call a couple. Wednesday had never thought the day would come when she would have a boyfriend. Throughout her life, many boys had tried to approach her, both at the normie schools she attended and at Nevermore, before her relationship with Luke developed. However, none of those boys had caught her interest, and she quickly pushed them away since they couldn't tolerate her personality, though some were more persistent than others. She didn't think she was capable of forming a romantic connection with anyone. If she wasn't suited to being a friend, how could she even imagine herself as a girlfriend? She saw herself as someone distant, with clearly defined priorities. Her own interests always came first. The affection of others was nothing more than a bothersome detail she preferred to ignore. However, sitting in front of her was Luke, the only person with whom no problems ever arose. Not because she had changed, but because Luke was so similar to her. They both shared an innate arrogance, a certain narcissism, and a lack of interest in conventional relationships. Like her, Luke had no qualms about putting his own needs first. On top of that, they were both geniuses, far superior to others their age when it came to combat skills. Wednesday wouldn't want to be with a weakling who didn't know how to fight. Luke felt the same. In the long run, he didn't want a burden as a girlfriend. It would be annoying to constantly have to protect her. "What are you thinking about? It's rare for you to be silent for so long," Wednesday asked, her usual unflappable expression fixed on Luke. "I thought you liked silence," Luke said, still staring at the sky. "I do," Wednesday replied, her tone completely flat. "I'm just asking about the anomaly of your closed mouth. Instead of beating around the bush, answer." Luke let out a slight smile before responding. "I'm thinking about Natasha." "The housekeeper?" Wednesday asked, raising an eyebrow. "Yes," Luke confirmed, his hand resting on his chin as if reflecting more to himself than to her. "It's been a while since I've heard from her. I wonder if she's all right." His tone was casual, but there was a hint of unease in his words, something unusual for him. "How touching. You're worried about a mere housekeeper," Wednesday commented. "It's more than that," Luke replied. "She's been with me since forever. Even though she didn't provide many benefits as the caretaker of the orphanage, thanks to her, I'm still alive." Moreover, Natasha's mission was important. She needed to find the place where his parents had hidden the evidence they had gathered all this time. Wednesday moved a little closer to Luke, enough for her shadow to stretch over him. "So, you're worried about her?" she asked. It seemed strange to her that Luke would care about someone. The only person she knew who had affected Luke emotionally was Enid, and that didn't seem to be a big deal, since they broke their promise and had an argument, but here was Luke, in the same mood as before and not too affected by it. "It's natural to worry about someone who has been a part of your life for years," Luke explained, staring intently at Wednesday. "Natural, perhaps for you," Wednesday retorted, tilting her head slightly as she studied his reaction. "You're not the one to say that," Luke thought with a slight smile, gazing at Wednesday's face, which was just inches from his own. From the series, he knew that Wednesday cared about her family members. When Thing nearly died, she showed deep concern. She also defended her brother, albeit in an unconventional way. Here, although she was colder and more ruthless than in the series, she still showed concern for her loved ones, like with Thing or her younger brother. She defended Eugene solely because he reminded her of her brother. She even wanted to save Nevermore from the prophecy and Rowan when she saw his future death. She also helped him and showed her concern in her own way. She wasn't a robot without emotions. If she were, she wouldn't have accepted to be his girlfriend. "I remember you telling me that you confronted your brother's abusers. That's because he matters to you," Luke said. "Matters," Wednesday repeated, almost as if the word were foreign to her. "If you call worrying about someone burying your brother alive," he added. "Burying him? What a way to show affection," Luke said, unable to suppress a slight laugh. "Still, you were expelled from your last school for nearly killing the bully who messed with your brother. Why would you defend him if he doesn't matter to you?" Luke added. "It's the most logical thing. I won't let anyone bother him, except for me," she retorted, unfazed. Luke smiled, recognizing the twisted nuance in her words. He knew that this was how Wednesday processed what others would call concern. "Then if someone bothers me, you'd make sure to be the only one doing it?" Luke asked with a slight smile. "If someone bothers you, I'll make sure they stop, although I doubt anyone would dare, and if you're bothered, I don't think you'll need my help," Wednesday replied. "You're right, I'll take care of it. I don't want you to get expelled for murder," Luke said. At that moment, Luke's expression changed. "What happened?" Wednesday asked, noticing the shift in his expression. It went from carefree to alert. "It's Natasha. She seems to be in trouble," Luke said, standing up. Luke was flying over the Jericho forest at high speed. Wednesday was on his back, her arms wrapped around his neck. Her black pigtails fluttered in the force of the wind. "Distance?" Wednesday asked through their mental link. "58 km. We'll arrive in about 30 minutes, Luke replied. "How many enemies?" Wednesday asked. "3 from a clan called Karya. Never heard of them," Luke responded. "Clan of exiles involved in assassinations and shady dealings. As far as I know, they're all half-breeds who were shunned and expelled from their families, so they banded together in this clan," Wednesday explained. Then they shouldn't be powerful," Luke remarked. "Half-breeds had less talent than someone fully outcast. This wasn't like Harry Potter, where half-bloods could be the most powerful." "Don't be overconfident. They have a strong reputation for being effective in the missions they take. They're half-breeds who face outcasts ones, and yet they can still kill their targets," Wednesday said. She trusts her strength, but never underestimates an enemy. As for Luke, he's become more arrogant since defeating Atlas, a Gorgon over 100 years old who wielded mythical bronze. "You know a lot about the dark dealings of the outcast world," Luke said with a slight smile. "I've always liked dark and underground topics, like demons, dark rituals, assassin clans," Wednesday replied, beginning to list several dark and shady subjects that piqued her interest. As they flew, the landscape changed. The trees became much taller, surpassing 30 meters in height, with wide trunks ranging between 1.5 and 3 meters in diameter. Their canopies, situated at the top, formed a dense network of foliage, though spaced far enough apart to allow broad stretches of space between them. Luke flew above the trees at a height of about 50 meters. Thanks to his enhanced vision and the gaps between the trees, he noticed a figure running at great speed through the forest, zigzagging between the trunks in a clear attempt to escape. Luke immediately recognized the figure by her distinctive red hair. It was Natasha. She didn't look in good shape. She had several cuts bleeding from different parts of her body, and she was limping. However, her speed was incredible, giving her a slight lead over her 3 pursuers. "There they are," Luke said, his expression more furious than before at seeing Natasha's condition because of these 3 men. Wednesday had to focus her eyes to make out the 4 figures in the distance. Though her vision was sharp, it couldn't compare to Luke's, a clairvoyant. A clairvoyant can enhance their vision to a level comparable to an eagle's, and even surpass that bird. 3 auras, thought Wednesday, unable to deny feeling a bit envious. Having 3 auras already put you on a completely different level. A fat guy, a skeleton, and a dwarf. What a peculiar group, Luke commented as he began descending rapidly toward their new enemies. The leader of the group was a tall, lanky, pale person who looked like a skeleton. His skin clung to his bones and was ghostly pale. He had curly black hair, black painted lips, and even black painted nails. He looked like a drug-addicted rocker. To his right was a large, overweight man with a big belly. He wore a black t-shirt and dark pants. He also had multiple piercings in his ears. Lastly, the short man had a more normal expression compared to his 2 companions. Too normal. He had brown bowl-cut hair, a gray jacket, and pants. "If I had to guess, the skeleton is a vampire, the fat guy a werewolf, and the dwarf I don't know," said Wednesday as she got a clearer look at the 3 men. Luke was about to say something when Wednesday, without waiting, interrupted him. "The skeleton is mine," she said, and without giving any time for replies, she launched into the attack. Wednesday leaned forward, resting her hands on Luke's shoulders, and in one smooth and fluid motion, propelled herself with great force. The momentum, combined with the speed at which they were flying, catapulted her with impressive acceleration. The skeleton only had time to lift his head and see Wednesday holding her dark scythe, making a downward cut toward him. The strike descended quickly and lethally, aimed directly at the skeleton man's head. In a swift reflex, the man raised his pale, bony hands to protect himself. From those hands, a dark stream of blood erupted, quickly molding into a shield that covered him from the black blade of the scythe. Wednesday's scythe collided with the blood shield, and a sharp sound resonated in the air. The blood shield withstood the impact for only 3 seconds before crumbling, allowing the scythe to continue on its path. However, those 3 seconds of resistance gave the man just enough time to evade the blow, though not entirely. The black blade grazed his skull, leaving a long wound that pierced through his scalp, from which blood began to flow. A vampire, just as I expected, Wednesday thought, watching as the vampire man staggered back, his eyes filled with surprise and fury fixed on her. "Are you okay, Shark?" asked the short man, approaching his companion. The vampire named Shark nodded slightly without taking his gaze off Wednesday. The fat man didn't stop to check on his teammate. He ran toward Wednesday, his large right arm transforming into the arm of a werewolf, covered in gray fur and ending in claws. His furry fist gained more strength and size as it headed toward Wednesday, who remained frozen in place with a stoic expression. Just before the werewolf's fist got any closer to Wednesday, Luke arrived, surrounded by numerous condensed telekinetic waves around his fist. Bam! Both fists collided, creating a shockwave that stirred up a large amount of wind and dust. Luke's condensed telekinetic waves were released, unleashing a power that surpassed that of the werewolf, who was pushed back about 10 meters. He didn't go flying. His strength is good, Luke thought, shaking his hand slightly. With his telekinetic punches, he could send Atlas flying, a Gorgon who possessed mythical bronze. Although he never had a fistfight with the Gorgon, it was more likely he would have lost. Luke always dodged his blows and then struck back, sending him flying. "Never more uniforms. You must be Luke Poe and you're Wednesday Addams," said the vampire named Shark, examining Luke and Wednesday. "Correct. Should we give you a prize?" "I didn't bring any candy with me," Luke commented with a slight mocking smile, searching through his empty pockets. Great arrogance. It's normal after he killed the Gorgon and the children of Elliot Spellman. I must use this to my advantage, Shark thought. He was more concerned about the girl with the stoic expression holding a dark scythe. It wouldn't be good for the Kyria clan to make enemies with the Addams family, a powerful family of psychics. "We can't kill her," Shark thought, drawing a long knife. "Blue aura," commented the short man. They had been chasing Natasha for days. They knew she was cut off from communication. She didn't have a phone. The only way she could ask for help would be through telepathy. That means... Before the short man could continue speaking, an invisible force pinned him down. He could no longer move a single muscle, not even his jaw to speak. Wednesday, who had been still, raised her hand and made a slight gesture pointing at the man. From the ground where the man stood, spikes of darkness emerged, piercing him from different angles. They penetrated his body with great precision. He couldn't do anything about the sudden immobilization. That wasn't all. Luke pointed at him with his hand and lifted the dying little man into the air. With a swift motion, he directed him toward the ground with overwhelming force. The ground trembled as the man's body hit with such intensity that his bones broke with a sharp crack. The screams of pain quickly extinguished, and the body lay sprawled in a grotesque position, barely moving. Shark and the werewolf could do nothing to defend their companion. Everything happened in a matter of seconds. Luke and Wednesday didn't even exchange a glance to execute the coordinated attack. "I wonder what kind of outcast he was," Luke remarked, resting a hand on his chin. "It doesn't matter. He was weak," Wednesday replied, her gaze filled with disdain for the short man's body. There was not a trace of regret or confusion in her expression for having killed a man in a matter of seconds. Shark and the werewolf frowned slightly. They were not angry about their companion's death. They felt no such camaraderie. Moreover, the short man was the weakest of the three, so his death wasn't a significant blow to their battle power. Luke and Wednesday didn't say another word. Each of them launched at great speed toward their enemy. Wednesday against Shark, and Luke against the fat man. "Let's see how strong you are, Kyria clan," Luke thought, propelling himself with a telekinetic wave toward the werewolf. Luke condensed telekinetic waves into the sole of his foot and struck at the werewolf, who could only cross his arms in an X to defend himself. He was pushed back more than 10 meters, crashing into one of the large trees. The trunk was strong enough not to shatter from the impact. Luke advanced toward his enemy, leaving Wednesday to deal with the vampire. He had wanted to fight a vampire, but she had chosen first. I wonder how strong a half-blooded werewolf is. Too bad you didn't inherit both of your parents' outcast genes, Jacob, Luke commented with a slightly disappointed expression. The fight would have been more exciting if his enemy had two types of powers. Luke's mental reading had improved significantly compared to before. Now, with just eye contact, he could read memories from hours earlier, not just current thoughts. This allowed him to learn the werewolf's name and a few other irrelevant details. The werewolf, named Jacob, looked surprised by Luke's comment. "Get out of my mind, telepath," Jacob shouted, hitting his head hard. An unorthodox but effective method, Luke thought with a slight grimace as he was forced out of Jacob's thoughts. He hadn't been able to delve too deeply into his memories. After that, Jacob's body began to change. In less than 5 seconds, his arms grew hairier and more muscular. Claws sprouted from his thick hands. Partial transformation, huh? Luke thought as he watched Jacob sprint toward him at full speed. Luke manipulated the telekinetic waves around him. When Jacob was about 5 meters away, he unleashed them in an explosion of kinetic waves that expanded in all directions. The blast reached a radius of 10 meters, hitting Jacob with the shockwave. His body was suspended in the air, thrown back as if he were a rag doll. The violent push sent him flying several meters in a matter of seconds. About 10 meters away, Jacob's body slammed into one of the large trees again, but this time the impact was more violent and the bark cracked. The damage Jacob suffered from this attack was also more severe. He coughed up a large amount of blood and felt several of his ribs break. "Do a full transformation, or you won't last long," Luke remarked. From this brief encounter, Luke could tell that the half-blood werewolf in front of him was slightly stronger than Tyler the Hyde, another half-blood. If he used a full transformation, he would be several levels more powerful than Tyler. "Don't be cocky, kid," Jacob growled, wiping the blood from his mouth. His broken ribs healed, and the cuts he had suffered from the tree's splinters also healed at a rapid pace. Luke wasn't surprised by this. He knew that werewolves had a high regeneration ability. Jacob's body began to change again. His entire body became covered in fur. His muscles grew larger. His human face transformed into that of a wolf with fangs and gray eyes. His height increased, and the aura he gave off was fiercer than before. His physical strength must surpass Atlas's, and his regeneration is better, Luke thought as he observed the transformation. Atlas was a tank. His mythical bronze skin was very difficult to damage, though he didn't have the super regeneration of a werewolf or an Oragreen psychic. His strength of 5 tons was impressive, but not the best. Werewolves his age far exceeded that strength. Atlas's crucial advantage was his skin, tougher than steel, his claws far deadlier than a werewolf's, thanks to the mythical bronze, and his petrifying gaze. Even so, Luke considered Atlas a more challenging opponent than the werewolf before him. Skin tougher than steel was no joke, and his mythical bronze claws only needed to graze Luke to cut him cleanly and inflict a serious wound. The werewolf had advanced regeneration, but that's not the same as mythical bronze. If Luke hit him once and didn't give him time to recover, it would be game over for Jacob. He'd be turned to mush before he had a chance to regenerate. Jacob, in his full werewolf form, began running on all fours toward Luke. His speed reminded Luke of when Atlas had turned his lower body into that of a snake. When Jacob was about 5 meters away, he leaped, quickly closing the distance. Luke created a barrier around his body to defend against the attack. Jacob's claws struck the shield with a dull thud. The telekinetic shield held firm. Before Luke could send Jacob flying, the werewolf kept clawing at the barrier, trying to tear it apart. "Is he Warwick?" Luke thought. If he tried to release the telekinetic force from the shield to push Jacob away, it would be counterproductive, as the repulsive force wasn't strong enough, and he'd just be left without a barrier to protect himself. The shield couldn't withstand Jacob's barrage of strikes. It shattered, and the sharp claws headed straight for Luke, who was already prepared to dodge the attack. With his observation hacky and the help of telekinetic waves, he moved, evading the attack perfectly. How, Jacob thought, surprised to see how Luke had dodged his attack with such precision. Luke's barrier had lasted less than 5 seconds, and his attack had been fast. How could a telekinetic dodge with such precision? His senses shouldn't be able to keep up with such speed. Wasting no time, Luke concentrated telekinetic waves around his left elbow, enveloping it. The air around him seemed to compress just before impact, as if the very environment tensed. Luke's elbow struck violently against the left side of Jacob's abdomen, just below his ribs, in a vulnerable area. At the moment of impact, a dull crack could be heard. Muscles and internal tissues suffered under the pressure, and air was forcefully expelled from Jacob's lungs, leaving him breathless. His ribs creaked, not breaking but suffering microfractures that sent waves of pain through his torso. The telekinetic energy made the impact not only felt on the surface, but also penetrate internally, damaging his organs. Despite the powerful blow, Jacob didn't go flying. Luke controlled his telekinetic force to prevent that from happening. Jacob staggered, his body rigid from the pain, unable to breathe properly. Luke pressed on with his attack, giving him no time to recover. His left fist struck Jacob's left lung, causing more pain and making it even harder for him to catch his breath. Before Jacob could even process the pain, Luke's right fist slammed directly into his jaw with such force that his teeth ground together, and his head snapped to the side, leaving his vision momentarily blurred. Then Luke struck Jacob's abdomen again with a punch right in the same spot where his elbow had landed earlier, increasing the internal damage and tearing muscles. Each blow was faster than the last. Luke enveloped his fists with telekinetic waves, but without condensing too much, ensuring the werewolf wouldn't be sent flying. The speed and force of the compressed telekinetic attacks made each punch feel like an internal explosion. Jacob's healing factor didn't have enough time to recover from so many internal injuries at such a rapid pace. Finally, when Luke sensed Jacob was on the verge of collapse, he spun his body, lifting his right leg and delivering a kick to the center of the werewolf's furry abdomen. This time, an immense amount of telekinetic energy concentrated in his leg, exponentially increasing the power of the impact. Bam! Jacob was sent hurtling backward at great speed, his body flying like a projectile. As Jacob flew toward the splintered trunk, the same one that had survived the previous impact, Luke aimed both hands at him, and telekinetic waves began to twist in the air around him. Just before the werewolf reached the tree trunk, Luke gave a violent telekinetic pull. Jacob's speed doubled in an instant, his body accelerating toward the tree faster than before. Jacob crashed into the trunk with an explosion of splinters and wood. The already splintered trunk finally gave way, breaking with a deafening crack. Shards of wood flew everywhere, and the tree slowly collapsed while Jacob's body fell to the ground, completely shattered, unable to move after the brutal beating he had endured. Fortunately for Luke, the enormous tree didn't fall in his direction, so he didn't need to dodge it, as he wouldn't have been able to move it with his telekinesis. That tree must weigh more than 5 tons. He is not comparable to Atlas, thought Luke as he walked toward Jacob's battered body, which was beginning to revert to its human form. He observed Jacob's severely wounded body, breathing heavily and looking at Luke with half-closed eyes, a clear expression of surprise in his gaze. "So, you possess 3 auras," Jacob commented with difficulty, coughing up blood. His head rested against the base of the fallen tree. There was a rumor about Luke that had been circulating throughout the outcast society. The rumor was that he possessed 3 auras. The rumor had 2 solid foundations. First, that he had defeated Atlas, a Gorgon who could petrify with just eye contact. How did he defeat that veteran Gorgon? He would have had to cover his eyes, no doubt. If he did and didn't have a clairvoyant aura, he would be an idiot since he'd be an easy target. Secondly, the memory extracts Luke presented to the outcast police. Some people believed he had obtained these memory extracts with the help of a telepath, while others said he possessed a blue aura like his mother. But if that were true, it would mean one of these two theories was false. So many believed that both were real, which made Luke a user of three auras: telekinesis, clairvoyance, and telepathy. Yes, Luke replied with a barely perceptible smile, showing neither alarm nor concern. Pretty cool, right? He knew the news would spread sooner or later, and there was no point in hiding it anymore. The only downside was that he wouldn't be able to surprise the Spellmans like before. His attention quickly returned to Jacob, whose wounds, despite the brutal beating, were beginning to heal. Jacob was recovering, but needed several minutes to fully heal, and Luke had no intention of giving him that chance. Luke took a step forward and slowly raised his leg. "What are you doing?" Jacob asked with difficulty, trying to buy some time to move and attempt to survive. "The same thing you would do," Luke responded. Without using telekinesis or any extra power, he simply pulled his leg back and kicked Jacob's head hard. The sound of the impact was sharp and solid. Jacob's skull cracked, but it wasn't enough. Luke, unmoved, repeated the process. He lifted his leg and struck again, over and over. Each blow echoed louder than the last, and Jacob's head, unable to heal fast enough, began to give way. Why did it all end like this? Jacob thought. The mission was supposed to be easy by now. The Poe family's housekeeper was already badly injured and exhausted after being hunted for days by several different groups. Flesh tore, bones cracked. With each hit, Jacob's head broke apart like an overripe fruit. Finally, after several strikes, the werewolf's head was completely shattered, scattering blood and fragments of bone across the ground like a smashed watermelon. And so, Jacob died. His healing factor wasn't advanced enough to save him if his brain was crushed and destroyed. I stained my shoe, Luke thought with a slight grimace as he looked at his white sneaker, now covered in blood. Luke turned and began walking toward Wednesday. The distance between them had increased due to their respective battles. As he moved, his eyes caught the signs of a fierce struggle. The ground was marked by deep, long slashes and small craters. He saw Wednesday sitting on the ground, her back resting against the trunk of a tree. She seemed to be catching her breath, her face as impassive as ever. Not far from her, a dark, dense, twisted spear, as if made of pure shadows, was impaled vertically into the ground, completely piercing through a pale head. The dark spear had punctured the skull belonging to Shark, the vampire. The vampire's black, curly hair fell messily around his face, contrasting with the paleness of his skin. Shark's decapitated body lay nearby, sprawled on the ground. The three-man team, sent by the Karya clan, had been killed by Luke and Wednesday. Luke noticed that Wednesday had a cut on her shoulder, and blood was coming out of it. The cut wasn't deep, but it was strange to see that someone could hurt her. "Are you okay?" Luke asked, hurrying to her side and kneeling down, looking at her wound with some concern. "It's just a small cut. It's nothing," Wednesday said dryly, trying to push Luke's hand away, but in the end, she didn't. She liked that Luke showed concern for her, which didn't happen often, but she wouldn't show it openly. "It's not deep, but it's long. You'll need a new uniform," Luke commented, looking closely at the wound. Wednesday's black jacket had torn, along with the shirt underneath, exposing the skin of her delicate shoulder. It was the first time Luke had seen Wednesday's pale shoulder. "What am I thinking?" Luke thought, shaking his head. "It's just a little blood. I'll be fine," Wednesday said, pushing Luke aside and standing up, already recovered. They had both killed outcast adults who specialized in hunting missions, and only Wednesday ended up with a minor cut. Few students were capable of such a feat. "If you say so," Luke said, shrugging. He knew how independent Wednesday was. It would be pointless to show more concern. Quickly, both of them headed toward Natasha, who was lying on a large stone with her eyes half closed. Her condition wasn't good. "Natasha, are you okay?" Luke asked, hurrying to her side. Her breathing was weak and she had several cuts, one on her cheek, another on her stomach that was deep and bleeding, and several more on her legs. Natasha's red hair was dirty and disheveled, as if she had been on the run for days. For the first time, Wednesday saw Luke's housekeeper, a beautiful red-haired woman who must have been around 30 or a bit older. "Luke, you came," Natasha said slowly, opening her eyes tiredly and looking toward Luke. She was happy to see him after so long. "What about the pursuers?" Natasha asked with difficulty. Her vision was blurry. She had been pursued for days. "They're all dead. We need to get back to Nevermore quickly," Luke said, turning around so Natasha could climb onto his back. With effort, she climbed onto Luke's back, intertwining her hands around his neck. Luke stood up and looked at the sky. They had to reach Nevermore as soon as possible so Natasha could be treated by the nurse or Professor Fitz. "I heard everything you did. Your mother would be proud of you. I'm proud of you, Luke. Maybe I wasn't the best nanny during your childhood, but I've always been proud of you," Natasha said slowly, with her eyes closed, resting her head on the back of Luke's neck. Luke's expression changed upon hearing those words. He felt a warm sensation in his chest. It was rare for him to feel this in either of his two lives. "Thanks, but don't talk anymore, or you'll lose strength," Luke said with an odd expression. He wasn't used to such direct displays of affection from Natasha. "I just had to tell you, in case." Before she could continue, Luke interrupted her. "Hey, don't raise a death flag. You're not going to die, just rest. We'll be at Nevermore in 20 minutes or less," Luke said. Natasha smiled faintly and rested her head on Luke's neck. "Am I supposed to wait here?" Wednesday asked, raising an eyebrow, looking at Natasha on Luke's back. That was her spot. "Yes, I'll come back for you later. You can walk to Nevermore while you wait for me," Luke said. He was about to take off but stopped. He noticed the dissatisfaction on Wednesday's face. Although her expression remained almost the same, after spending so much time with her, Luke could tell she wasn't happy. "Would you prefer if I carried you like a princess?" Luke asked with a barely perceptible smile. It wasn't the best moment to tease her. "It's better than getting my shoes dirty walking through this forest," Wednesday said in her usual flat tone, taking a step toward Luke to be carried. "I didn't expect her to agree," Luke thought as he efficiently lifted her. He held her in the typical princess carry, though the scene was far from sweet or romantic. Wednesday's eyes remained fixed on the horizon, devoid of any trace of discomfort. Her hands, instead of holding onto Luke, rested on her own lap. Luke took off without saying another word, gradually picking up speed. Besides flying, he used his telekinesis to ensure Natasha wouldn't fall, as she had fallen asleep. Wednesday remained unfazed. Luke's hands were constantly touching her, unlike when she was on his back, but she didn't mind. To Luke's surprise, he managed to reach Nevermore in 18 minutes. He hadn't realized that situations where people you care about are in danger could give you a power-up. A few minutes before arriving at Nevermore, Luke sent a telepathic message to Larissa. When they arrived, the nurse and Professor Fitz were already waiting and immediately began treating Natasha without wasting any time. "Will she be okay?" Luke asked, looking at the elderly nurse. "Yes, she just needs to rest for a few hours. She hasn't slept for days. She has multiple external and internal injuries, even poison, and she hasn't eaten in days," the nurse explained briefly, while ushering everyone out of the room so Natasha could rest peacefully. "When she wakes up, I'll let you know immediately," the nurse said, noticing Luke's reluctance to leave the room. After that, Luke and Wednesday started walking toward the dorms, both in silence. "You seem very worried about her," Wednesday commented, breaking the silence. She knew Luke wasn't emotionless, but it was rare to see him so clearly concerned about someone. "The Poe family is nearly extinct. It's just her and me against the Spellmans, who make demonic deals. Thanks to Natasha, I didn't die as a baby, and I consider her an older sister. Do you understand why I'm worried about her?" Luke said, raising his voice, irritated by Wednesday's constant questioning about his concern for Natasha, as if she were expendable. "I understand. It makes sense. She's more than just a housekeeper," Wednesday nodded, unfazed by Luke's tone. "But," Wednesday added, stopping in her tracks, causing Luke to stop as well and look at her with a slightly furrowed brow. "It's not just you and her. I'm here too. I'll help you cut off the Spellman's heads. Don't leave me out," Wednesday said, extending her hand and taking Luke's. His furrowed brow softened, replaced by a surprised look, similar to when Natasha told him she was proud of him. What was happening today? The two coldest and most reserved women he knew had both comforted him. It was a strange yet comforting feeling. "Thanks. Sorry for raising my voice," Luke said, scratching his cheek with one hand while holding Wednesday's cold, pale hand with the other. "It was my fault for asking the same question multiple times," Wednesday replied, not giving it much importance. Did she just say it was her fault? Luke thought, still surprised by Wednesday's attitude. "Let's go to the cafeteria. I'm hungry after killing those people from the Kyria clan," Wednesday said, letting go of Luke's hand and changing their destination. Luke followed her. He was hungry too after the battle and flying at high speed for nearly an hour. Luke was in the infirmary, watching as Natasha devoured one plate of food after another. She had already recovered. She was wearing a patient's uniform and eating as if possessed by the demon of gluttony. Her wounds had healed, and she only had bandages on her left arm and hand. "It looks like you're doing well if you can eat that fast," Luke remarked, feeling more at ease seeing the housekeeper in such good condition. "Try barely eating anything for 2 weeks while being hunted and attacked by assassins who never rest," Natasha replied, pausing her meal for a moment. She took a napkin, delicately wiped her mouth, then drank some water before continuing to eat. "That's her personality," Luke thought with a slight smile, letting Natasha eat in peace. 10 minutes later, she finished and looked at Luke. "You've accomplished a lot since I left," Natasha commented, praising him. "No Poe ever struck such a hard blow to the Spellman reputation and killed 2 direct heirs, not to mention killing a powerful servant like Atlas." "I know," Luke said. "As modest as ever," Natasha added with a slight sarcastic smile. "Do you want me to tell you everything the Spellmans went through?" Luke asked, and Natasha nodded. During her return to Jericho, while being chased, she hadn't learned everything in detail. She wanted specifics. Luke focused more on the battle he had against Atlas, Sabrina, and Sebastian during the Blood Moon, and on the fleeting memories he managed to read from Atlas before he died. "It's clear they want to kill you with much more enthusiasm than they did your father. I don't think the protection the Congress gave you will be of much help," Natasha commented after Luke finished his story. Luke nodded. He thought the same. If they attacked Nevermore with an army of thousands of undead, he doubted that just because the council forbade them from attacking him at Nevermore, they would comply. Most likely, they would still decide to attack him, just on a smaller scale, avoiding trying to kill others, although there could be injuries and school property might be destroyed. "And what about you? Did you find what my parents hid? Since when has the Kyria clan been hunting you?" Luke asked, firing several questions at once. "My destination was Ohio. I got there without being pursued by anyone, but during my stay, they discovered me. The Spellmans twice requested the services of the Kyria clan, once at the beginning of the war, when Lord Edgar's brother was alive, and now. The first time they rejected the request because the Poes were still an important family of psychics. This time, they accepted, believing there's no harm in doing so when you're the only one left alive," Natasha said. "They could have requested their services during my father's time," Luke said. His father, like him, had been the only surviving member of the Poe family. "They didn't need to. Why request the help of the Kyria clan when they can take care of the last Poe themselves? Now they've requested their services again because something is different. They want to kill you with such intensity for some reason we don't know," Natasha said. "Maybe because of my 3 auras. There's a prophecy that says I'll kill them all," Luke replied with a slight narcissistic smile. "It's possible. It'll only put you in more danger, but we have to deal with that," Natasha said. "The Kyria work in teams of 3, a fighter, a tank, and a support. I took down 2 groups, and the third was handled by you and your goth girlfriend," Natasha added. Luke let the comment about his goth girlfriend slide. and was surprised by the fact that Natasha had taken out 2 groups, a total of 6 outcasts. "You managed to kill that many?" Luke asked, his tone surprised. "Natasha is a shapeshifter, like Mystique from the X-Men. Her power isn't much in battles between outcasts, where vampires, werewolves, psychics, and others fight. On the other hand, Amaranth, the vampire shapeshifter, if she drank the blood of a victim, like a werewolf, could replicate some of their power, but that's only because she's a hybrid, part shapeshifter and part vampire." This is why it was hard for Luke to believe that Natasha had managed to eliminate 6 outcasts. How do you kill a group of 3 when you're alone and can only change your appearance? "Seems like you have little confidence in my strength, despite all the times I beat you in combat," Natasha said. "In those fights, I was a beginner and couldn't use my auras," Luke replied. "That's true. Watch," Natasha said as she extended her right arm with a mysterious smile. Luke watched curiously, his eyes fixed on Natasha's delicate fingers as they began to transform before him. The smooth skin of her hand started to darken and harden. Her palm and fingers lengthened, sharpening with precision until they formed a thin, lethal blade, gleaming under the room's light. The blade extended from the tips of her fingers down to just below her elbow, creating a perfect, deadly extension of her arm. "Incredible," Luke said, wide-eyed. He hadn't expected this. "How do you do it? Shapeshifters are only supposed to change into people, not objects," Luke added, examining the sharp blade in front of him. The metal was incredibly hard, probably steel. "Witchcraft," Natasha answered. "Aren't you afraid of becoming a deranged hag?" Luke asked, recalling the hag he had faced over a year ago. A deformed, ugly creature, completely mad. "I'm willing to take the risk if it means protecting you and eliminating the Spellmans," Natasha replied. "I can protect myself. You don't need to risk yourself for me," Luke said, feeling a bit embarrassed by her comment. "Oh, how brave. Should I give you a pat on the back?" Natasha asked with a slight, mocking smile. "Stop making fun of me, I'm serious. If we had both gone, we could have defeated the Kyria clan without much trouble," Luke said in a serious tone. Natasha had arrived badly injured, which made sense after facing 3 groups of outcasts who specialized in hunts and assassinations. Natasha's mocking smile faded as she looked at Luke in surprise. It was the second time she'd seen Luke worry about her. The first was just a few hours ago, when she was half dead. She knew she hadn't treated Luke well in the orphanage, which is why their relationship wasn't great. After officially meeting in Larissa's office over a year ago, Luke started attending Nevermore, and they became separated again. Then, during Luke's first summer vacation from Nevermore, she sent him to his maternal family's home and left him there. She knew Luke didn't get along with them, and they didn't like him either, but she believed it was the best option. Because of all this, she thought Luke held some antipathy toward her. She believed he would never worry about her or consider her part of his family, knowing Luke's strange. Little sociopathic, though she wasn't the best judge of that, and antisocial personality, she didn't think he would ever care about her, given how their relationship had developed. "Natasha," Luke said, noticing that the redhead wasn't responding. He saw a strange gleam in her eyes, something unusual. "You're right. It's better for us to act together now that we know the Spellmans will come after you by any means necessary," Natasha said, snapping back to reality, feeling a relief she'd never experienced before. She did not dislike Luke's concern for her. "Good. On another hand, can you transform your body into metal? Like metal skin?" Luke asked, curious. If she could do that, she'd be like Colossus from the X-Men. That would give her 2 X-Men powers. "Yes," Natasha replied, and her face turned a metallic color. "Incredible," Luke murmured, wondering what dark rituals Natasha had to perform to alter her body like this. One of Goody Adams' rituals in her Book of Shadows involved gathering various mutilated body parts for a dark resurrection ritual. "Let's get back to what's important," Natasha said, returning her skin to normal. "Oh, right. Did you find the evidence my parents and the other Poe ancestors gathered?" Luke asked. I found the location, but not where they're hidden exactly. Your parents were very careful. They likely put protections in place, so recovering them won't be easy, Natasha replied, starting to share what she knew. The evidence was in Ohio, as she'd mentioned before. Specifically in 2 cities, Shadyside and Sunnyvale. They would need to search there. Natasha had to halt her search due to her pursuers. She didn't want to draw attention and raise suspicions that there might be something hidden in those 2 seemingly ordinary small towns. We can go now, Luke suggested, eager to find the evidence. That's not the smartest move. You killed Elliot Spellman's 2 children. It's possible he'll take action himself, especially if you leave Nevermore. We need to prepare, Natasha said. We'll go to Ohio, but not right now, she quickly added when she noticed Luke was about to protest. Finish the school year. There's less than a month left. In the meantime, we need to plan how to go to Ohio to search for the evidence. Luke nodded, understanding Natasha's point. It would be dangerous to go to Ohio, just the 2 of them. The entire Spellman family could attack them, not just Elliot. But here at Nevermore, any attack would have to be on a smaller scale, as long as Luke stayed at the school. The problem was figuring out how to prepare for the search in Shadyside and Sunnyvale without drawing attention. It would be 2 of them against a whole prominent psychic family. How many Spellmans were there? Luke doubted his ability to face Elliot, unsure of his strength, and if more family members joined in, they'd be in serious trouble. It's not just Natasha and me. There's also Wednesday, Luke thought, recalling his girlfriend's words. Though adding a 3rd person didn't change the situation much. For now, Luke had to stay at Nevermore. He wasn't about to embark on a suicide mission to Ohio with his girlfriend and housekeeper. Monday, May 12, 2022. There were only 2 weeks left before classes ended. This week, all the students were studying like crazy because next week was final exam week. After that, the rave and Nevermore's annual dance would take place. Once the rave ended, the students would head home the next day. It had been an unusual year for the institution. The Poe Cup wasn't held, nor was Parents' Weekend. This was due to the large-scale attack the school had suffered. Everyone knew, thanks to the evidence Luke presented, that the culprits were the Spellmans. To Luke's surprise, no one blamed him, nor did he receive any hostile looks. He thought they would see him as someone dangerous, since it was because of him that the school was attacked and many lives were put at risk, but that didn't happen. The outcasts were very different from the normies. Still studying? Luke asked, closing his laptop after finishing 2 episodes of a series. Each episode lasted more than an hour, and when he started watching, Xavier and Ajax were in the same position as now, sitting on the floor with books on their laps in silence. Yeah, we have to study over 200 years of outcast and normie history. Not all of us have photographic memory, Xavier said, lifting his head from his book and looking at Luke enviously. Having that ability would be so useful. What if you help us with the exam through the telepathic link we have? Ajax asked, hopefully. He was already bored out of his mind, memorizing dates and events that wouldn't be useful to him at all. It won't work. They have a device that detects brain waves. They'll know the instant I send a message, Luke said, shaking his head. How do you know that? Xavier asked, raising an eyebrow. Wednesday told me. I wanted her to solve all the tedious problems for me during the math test, Luke replied with a grimace. He wasn't good at math, and having a photographic memory didn't help much if you didn't understand how to do the calculations. We're doomed, Ajax muttered, sighing as he looked at the hundreds of pages he still had to memorize. You have my respect for getting Wednesday to be your girlfriend, Xavier said, giving Luke a thumbs up and looking at him with pride for some reason. I don't know who I respect more. Luke for conquer over Wednesday or Wednesday for conquer over Luke, Ajax said, rubbing his chin thoughtfully. True, Xavier said, with a contemplative look as he began to debate in his mind who was harder to win over. Well, Wednesday has a more pessimistic and closed-off personality than our friend, so the point goes to him for getting her interested in him, Ajax said, tilting his head to the side with his eyes closed. Yes, but Luke was in love with Enid, and Wednesday made him choose her. Point for her, Xavier said, and Ajax nodded in agreement. These guys, Luke thought, rolling his eyes. Stop talking nonsense and get back to reading. Those pages won't turn themselves, Luke said, leaving the room. He started walking through the common room of his dorm. The place was silent, with only faint murmurs in the background. At various tables, groups of students were studying together. Luke noticed several eyes on him as he headed towards the exit of the dorm. His popularity, so to speak, had reached a new peak. Because of everything, the attack on the Blood Moon, him killing Atlas and Elliot's children, and most of all, his 3 auras. Less than 10% of students had a double aura. All those students were well known and had great reputations. Luke became the only psychic student with 3 auras. Too much attention, Luke thought, annoyed by the attention he was receiving. It was already enough being the last living Poe and a famous writer. He left the dorm and started walking through the nearly deserted halls of Nevermore. All the students were studying in their dorms or in the central courtyard, which had been remodeled after the battle. What to do, Luke wondered. He had already trained for more than 3 hours today. Edgar said overtraining wasn't good. 2 things came to Luke's mind. Go see Natasha, who was now staying at Nevermore until classes ended, or spend time with Wednesday. He chose Wednesday. Hey, he said, sending her a telepathic message. What? Wednesday replied after almost a minute. Can I come to your room? Luke asked. Why? Wednesday asked. Do I need a reason to visit my lovely, easygoing girlfriend? Luke asked. I suppose you're bored, Wednesday said, unfazed by Luke's compliment. She knew he only did it to tease her. Fine, you can come, but keep quiet. I'm busy, she added. Yes, ma'am, Luke said, starting to march towards Wednesday's dorm. Because of the location of her room, he could get there from the outside without needing to enter the dorm, which was forbidden. Wednesday had one of the few rooms with a balcony. Luke could fly and reach it easily, so he didn't need to sneak into the girls' dorm. He arrived at the balcony and approached the window, which was already open, so he stepped inside. Wednesday was seated in a chair, typing on an old typewriter. Despite Luke's footsteps, she didn't stop typing or even turn her head. The room was divided into 2. One half belonged to Wednesday and the other to her roommate. Her former roommate had been Enid, but she had changed rooms after everything that happened with Luke. Luke walked over and sat on Wednesday's bed, which had completely black sheets. Even the pillow was black. Did I stop a friendship from developing? Luke wondered, looking over at the bed that used to belong to Enid. In the series, Wednesday and Enid became best friends. However, that didn't happen here. Luke didn't feel guilty since the Wednesday of this world hadn't really connected with Enid or any other student. She had only connected with him, and that was thanks to the prophecy involving both of them. If the prophecy hadn't existed, Luke thought he would have never become Wednesday's boyfriend or even her friend. Before that, they never spoke to each other, even though they shared a group in one of their classes. Luke took the black pillow, placed it against the wall, and rested his head on it, lost in thought. He stopped thinking about Wednesday and Enid's almost friendship and began to think about Ohio, his next destination. He and Natasha had decided to head there, specifically to Shadowside and Sunnyvale. However, they still didn't know how they would go without running the risk of being attacked by all the Spellmans as soon as they found out they had left Nevermore. This might be my last year at Nevermore, Luke thought, feeling a bit melancholic. To his surprise, it had been 2 good school years. Several assassination attempts aimed at him, hag attacks, undead enemies, killing several of his mortal enemies, meeting 2 reliable friends, Xavier and Ajax, and meeting Wednesday. The only bad and good thing at the same time was the situation with Enid, because although it didn't seem to affect him on the surface, it did. The good thing is that she's with me, Luke thought as he glanced at Wednesday. He had told Wednesday that he was going to Ohio to search for the evidence his parents had hidden about the Spellmans, and she agreed without a second of hesitation to go with him. Wednesday found it far more appealing to head to Ohio with Luke, where it was very likely they would face assassination attempts and confront powerful psychics. She preferred that over staying at Nevermore, where she'd be bored without him and have a normal year. How do we get to Ohio in one piece? Luke wondered. One option was to leave Jericho incognito, traveling as stealthily as possible, but the idea wasn't very convincing. Natasha, a shapeshifter, had been found and chased. Even though it took them a while to locate her, now it was Luke and Wednesday. They weren't shapeshifters. Sooner or later, they would be found by the Spellmans, who now had the help of the Kyria clan, a group specialized in tracking and pursuing people trying to hide and remain unnoticed. The other option was to ask Larissa for help. The head mistress of Nevermore wanted to do everything she could to help Luke, as she had been Sophie's best friend, his late mother. Despite Larissa's wealth and position as head mistress of Nevermore, she didn't have a large family or the necessary resources to help Luke get to Ohio without being detected by the Spellmans. They still had to figure out a better plan to get to Ohio. What if we asked the Adams for help? Luke thought. He was certain that Wednesday's parents would want to help them. Once, Wednesday had told him that her family couldn't care less about getting involved in other families' feuds, and they loved war, as it meant battles, death, and assassinations. Luke dismissed the idea. He didn't know the Adams well enough to ask them for help, and he also wouldn't tell Wednesday to seek help from her own parents, since she hated asking for their help and preferred to do everything on her own. Luke's eyes started to close as he thought about these complicated and boring matters. In just a few minutes, he fell asleep, albeit in a very uncomfortable position. He slept for quite a while until he slowly opened his eyes again. There was less light than before, and he noticed someone sitting just a few inches from him out of the corner of his eye. Wednesday was sitting like a statue, staring at him with her deep, dark eyes. "How long was I asleep?" Luke asked, yawning and straightening up a bit. He also noticed a scarred hand resting on his chest, Thing, who had been napping on him. Over time, Luke had become friends with the hand. It was very easy to get along with Thing. "Almost 2 hours," Wednesday replied, still watching Luke in the same position she'd been in since she sat on the bed. "That long? How long has she been watching me sleep?" Luke thought with a strange expression. If she had been free, she could have woken him up, and they could have done something together. Luke got up from the bed slowly, picked up Thing, and placed him in a corner. The hand was in a deep sleep and didn't wake up. "Well, it's late. I'll leave before your roommate gets back," Luke said, walking toward the balcony. He had wanted to spend some time with her, but he was ignored, then ended up falling asleep, and she hadn't even bothered to wake him. He didn't blame her. He knew that Wednesday liked doing her things without being interrupted. It was already a lot that she let him stay in her room while she worked on her novel. "Wait," Wednesday said, grabbing Luke by the wrist. "We can do something. I'm free now," she added in her usual flat tone. "What do you suggest?" Luke asked. "Fencing practice. Let's go move it," Wednesday said without hesitation, walking toward the balcony. "This girl," Luke thought, following her. "You just want to use me as a training dummy to get your revenge," Luke said, walking behind her. In fencing class, the final exam would be an actual tournament. Wednesday wanted revenge on Bianca, so she had been training like crazy to perfect her technique. For that, she needed a training partner who was as much of a challenge as Luke. Luke didn't mind spending time with Wednesday practicing fencing. What bothered him was that he couldn't beat her. He could only win if he used his clairvoyance, and that felt like cheating. "Is your pride hurt because you can't defeat me?" Wednesday asked in a mocking tone, turning around and leaning against the stone balustrade of the balcony. "No, but," Luke replied, unsure of what to say as he stopped near Wednesday. "You're improving a lot too. I was trained by my father from a young age in duels to the death. Your talent is good," Wednesday said, placing both her hands on Luke's cheeks and looking at him intently. "Is she encouraging me?" Luke thought, a bit surprised. It wasn't as rare anymore for Wednesday to comfort him or show more frequent physical affection. They stared at each other for a moment, their faces drawing closer until they kissed for several seconds. Wednesday kept her hands on Luke's cheeks, and he had to lean down slightly due to the height difference. After that, they headed to the gym to practice fencing. Days passed like that. The exam week arrived and ended quicker than most had expected. Wednesday helped Luke with math, and he managed to pass with good grades. He didn't know how his girlfriend was so good at everything, but better for him. Wednesday achieved her revenge against Bianca. She defeated her in the final showdown. Once again, she challenged her to a military duel. No helmets, no points. Only this time, she defeated her decisively and made her bleed. She almost stabbed both of Bianca's eyes, but Professor Vlad managed to stop her in time. This made her classmates fear her even more, further isolating her. She cared little about the opinions of others. Besides, she would be leaving for Ohio the following year. On Friday afternoon, classes officially ended. The students breathed a sigh of relief. There was only one last weekend to spend at Nevermore before heading home. On Sunday, the Raven would take place, which this year had a difference compared to previous years. The novelty of this year's Raven is that all parents are invited to the dance. Since the parents' weekend couldn't be held, the school decided to invite parents and families to the Raven, creating a joint theme with the students. For this reason, this year's Raven is mandatory. Wednesday did not like this news at all for two reasons. First, she had to attend a stupid school dance, and second, she had to attend that stupid dance with her family. Luke was indifferent to the news. He had attended the Raven the previous year and had a good time with his two friends. He didn't mind repeating the event. Plus, he would finally get to meet the Addams family. He couldn't deny that he was excited to meet this peculiar family. Sunday, May 25th, 2022. 7:00 p.m. The secondary gym had been remodeled to serve as the venue for the Raven. Since the students' parents would also be attending, a larger space was needed than the hall typically used. The place had its walls covered with heavy dark gray velvet curtains and was dimly lit. Above, white floating fabrics hung, resembling mist, intertwined with silver skulls and dry branches. In the center of the ceiling, a large disco ball illuminated the dance floor. Surrounding the area were round tables with white tablecloths and chairs for everyone to sit comfortably and enjoy drinks or food. In the corners stood ice statues of various types of monsters like hides, yetis, and hags. At the center, there was a table with sound equipment controlled by a DJ. The floor exuded a light mist that reached the feet of the guests entering through the two large doors. Students entered accompanied by their parents, all dressed elegantly in white and gray colors. Xavier entered the hall dressed entirely in white tuxedo and shoes. He was accompanied by his father, Vicent Thorpe, a famous psychic in the outcast society. Vicent looked very much like Xavier, only a bit taller. He also wore a white tuxedo, but with some black details. His face exuded calm, and he had a slight smile as he walked beside his son. "Look, Dad, there's Ajax with his family," said Xavier, pointing to one of the tables that was almost fully occupied. At the table, Ajax was sitting, sipping a red drink that looked like blood but wasn't. He was with his father, his younger brother, who also attended Nevermore, and his older brother, who worked in Congress. Vicent nodded and walked with Xavier toward the Gorgon family's table. "Esthenon, my friend, it's been a long time," said Vicent with a big smile, extending his hand. Esthenon, Ajax's father, was already standing and smiled when he saw Vicent. "My old friend, you finally have time for social gatherings. It's good to see you here," said Esthenon, extending his hand for a handshake with Vicent. Esthenon appeared to be no older than 30. He stood over 2 meters tall, and unlike Ajax, his hair was uncovered. His snakes were peacefully asleep, not turning anyone to stone. "Work is complicated," said Vicent with a slight smile. Esthenon gestured for father and son to sit at his table. Xavier started chatting with Ajax. Ajax's younger brother played on his phone, oblivious to his surroundings, while his older brother began talking with Esthenon and Vicent. I don't see any of your wives. Couldn't they attend? Vicent asked, noticing only the men of the Petropolis family, Ajax's surname. It's complicated, said Esthenon with a sigh. It's hard to maintain harmony with 3 wives. Every day it gets worse, and they have less patience with each other, he added, shaking his head. As the Thorpe and Petropolis families chatted, more families entered the hall, and the start of the dance was drawing closer. The mermaid family of Kent and Divina were chatting at a table, with Bianca sitting with them since her mother wouldn't be attending the dance. She wasn't in a good mood after losing the final fencing exam to Wednesday in front of everyone. At another table sat Yoko's vampire family. They all wore dark sunglasses and had pale skin. They weren't too fond of the all-white dress code, but they had no choice since that was the theme. Yoko and Divina exchanged glances every now and then, but didn't dare approach each other, as they still hadn't told their families about their relationship, knowing their families were orthodox, like 99% of the outcasts. Few outcast families accepted the new trends and fashions of the new generation, who were connected to the normie world through social media and phones. One of those few families was the Ottingers, the family Eugene belonged to. His mother, Janet, had married Sue, and both were his mothers, although not all of the Ottingers accepted this. The background music was fitting for an end-of-year dance, though since the dance had not yet started, it was playing softly so people could talk comfortably. 10 minutes before the official start of the dance, the 2 large doors of the gym opened again. A cold breeze swept through the room, causing many families and students to turn their heads. A peculiar and very different family entered the hall. Leading them was a man with a thin mustache and a charming yet sinister smile. It was Gomez Adams, dressed in a dark pinstriped suit and tie. He wasn't much of a fan of white and never adhered to the rules. His stride was firm and passionate as he quickly glanced around, inspecting the hall. Upon noticing the disco ball above the dance floor, his face lit up. "Morticia, my love, would you care for a waltz? Like in our student days," he said in a romantic and melodramatic tone, taking his wife's hand. Morticia Adams followed him with grace. She was also dressed in a sleek, long black dress. Her dark hair fell in a perfect cascade over her shoulders, contrasting with her pale skin. "It's not time to dance yet, dear. This place, it could be darker, but it has its charm," Morticia replied in a calm tone as she surveyed the room. Behind them walked a boy of about 10 years old, Pugsley Adams. His hair was short and black, with brown eyes and light freckles. He wore his usual outfit, a striped t-shirt and long shorts. Pugsley's expression reflected a mix of curiosity and slight excitement. While his parents were immersed in their romance, he couldn't help but notice the massive ice statues in the corners. "Do you think a grenade would break them in one hit?" he asked quietly, with a half-smile as he looked at his sister. Walking beside him was Wednesday, dressed in a long, elegant black gown with ruffles that resembled a raven. The ruffles fell in perfect layers, barely brushing the floor, while the fabric shimmered faintly in the gym's dim light. Her lips, painted black, formed a thin line of permanent disapproval. "It's solid ice, probably reinforced by the school staff to withstand heat and pressure. A standard M67 hand grenade wouldn't generate enough energy to completely break it. The explosion produces a blast radius of 2.5 meters, but the fragmentary force wouldn't exceed the 60 psi needed to fracture ice of that mass," she explained without emotion. "You'd likely only create surface cracks. If you really want to destroy it, you need something more efficient. Maybe a thermite charge to melt it from the inside, or use liquid nitrogen to weaken its molecular structure before applying any explosives," Wednesday replied in her usual monotone. "I should have brought the thermite charge from home," Pugsley murmured as he nodded slowly. Everyone turned to look at the Adams family, who had become the center of attention as they moved toward one of the dimly lit tables. They were the only ones dressed in black, disregarding the raven theme. Many murmured, watching the Adams family as they passed by. Gomez and Morticia paid no attention to the whispers. They were lost in their own world, reminiscing about their fond memories of Nevermore. Pugsley muttered things to himself, and Wednesday stared straight ahead without blinking. "So many memories Nevermore brings back. Cara mia," said Gomez, sitting down in a chair and surveying the hall with a broad smile that showed all his teeth. Morticia, with her usual elegance and poise, sat beside him, crossing her legs with the grace of a dancer. Her dark eyes gleamed with nostalgia as she scanned the room. "Ah, mon cher, how many nights like this we spent at Nevermore. The waltz under the full moon, the shadows that danced with us, and that time we let the novice werewolves loose during their first transformation," said Morticia with a slight smile. "Poor creatures, they could barely control their instincts. Of course, they were supposed to be locked in Lupin's cages, as they always do with the new ones, until they return to their human form." Gomez chuckled softly, recalling the scene. "Ah, yes. The teachers were so worried about them, knowing how dangerous they could be during their first full moon. Out of control and feral, but we, on the other hand, enjoyed watching them run across the school grounds, freed from those cages. It was delicious chaos," Gomez added, giving Morticia's pale hand a gentle kiss. Wednesday had already developed the skill of tuning out her parents' stories. Her gaze shifted downward, and she looked at her new dress. She had bought it at a shop in Jericho just yesterday. The students had one last chance to visit Jericho. She went alone, as Luke didn't go due to a possible attack against him. Or at least that was his excuse not to go, since he rarely cared about the Spellman's assassination attempts on him. Like her parents and brother, Wednesday could have worn her usual attire, but she decided to come in this elegant black dress. She wasn't sure why she did it. Well, she actually knew, but she preferred not to think about it. "What are you thinking about, my little viper?" Gomez asked. Wednesday slowly lifted her gaze, her expression remaining unchanged, but her eyes revealed a slight hint of discomfort. Her mind had wandered to thoughts she'd rather not share. "I was thinking about how banal all of this is," she replied in her usual cold tone. "The music, the white dresses, the atmosphere of false celebration, it's suffocating." Gomez smiled. "Always so profound, my little viper. Events like this were never your thing." Wednesday didn't respond further. Her mind drifted back to what she was thinking about earlier. Luke. She had never mentioned Luke to her parents, let alone the connection they shared. She didn't want their relationship compared to the perfect story of dark romance her parents embodied. What would she do when Luke arrived at the dance? Nothing. Both of them were very distant in public. Neither liked showing affection in front of others, so she could keep hiding her relationship with Luke from her parents. They could ignore each other all night, and by the next day, it would be as if nothing had happened. The only problem was the talkative hand, Thing. Despite being just a hand, he was quite gossipy and could end up saying too much. He knew about her relationship with Luke. Even though Thing had sworn loyalty to her, she didn't fully trust that he'd keep quiet, especially with her father. So, to make sure her parents didn't find out about her and Luke, she locked Thing in a drawer. "Did you make any friends at Nevermore, Wednesday?" Morticia asked with some expectation. Gomez also looked at her eagerly. Throughout the year, the letters they received from Wednesday contained fewer than 10 words. She barely told them anything about her school life. The most she had told them was about the lunar eclipse, only mentioning that she was staying to recover Goody Adams' book, their family ancestor. "Friends," Wednesday repeated with a biting tone, letting the word hang in the air for a moment. "No, I have no friends to introduce to you," Wednesday replied in a definitive tone. Though aside from Luke, she did have Eugene. She considered him more like a little brother and protected him, but he could be counted as a friend. "My dear, it's inevitable to meet certain kindred spirits in places like Nevermore. There are bonds that simply can't be avoided. Like ours," Morticia said softly, glancing at Gomez for a moment. Wednesday maintained her composure, not letting her expression reveal anything. "There is nothing," she repeated, her tone unchanged. Then she looked away as if the conversation no longer interested her. "What a shame. I thought she'd find a friend or someone special at Nevermore," thought Morticia, her expression slightly saddened. She knew the attack had been aimed at Luke Poe, so she thought that during that chaotic battle, her daughter might have grown closer to the boy. Morticia, Gomez, and the entire outcast community were very curious to see, and possibly meet, the boy who possessed 3 auras and had killed 2 spellmans and the servant of more than 100 years, Atlas. Many families of the students were searching for Luke Poe, asking their children where the boy was who had caused Elliot Spellman to leave the triumvirate. 7:55 p.m. Luke was sitting in Principal Larissa's office, on a comfortable couch, while playing a MOBA game on his phone. Next to him was Natasha, chatting with Larissa, who was wearing an elegant white suit with exquisite details. 5 minutes until the Raven starts. I have to go now since I'll be giving a brief speech. I'll see you there, said Larissa, standing up as she glanced at the time on her pocket watch. Remember, Luke, put on the suit, said Larissa, leaving a fully prepared suit in a transparent cover on Luke's couch. You're the star of tonight, she added with a slight smile. Do I really have to wear this? Asked Luke, who had just been defeated because of a troll on his team. You need to wear white clothes, but if you want, you can use something from your own wardrobe, Larissa said, taking the suit back, but Luke stopped her. All right, I'll wear this suit. Thanks, he said, taking the suit for himself. Larissa smiled and left the office after saying goodbye. You've become a lot kinder compared to when you first arrived at Nevermore, Natasha commented once they were alone in the office. Well, Larissa always helps us when she can. She'll let us stay at Nevermore a bit longer until we find a way to Ohio, Luke said, standing up and grabbing the suit. Natasha nodded slightly. It was good that her master wasn't a spoiled child. And you, I don't see that the clothes you're wearing are white, said Luke. Natasha was dressed in black jeans, a leather jacket, and a plain black shirt. That's easily fixed, said Natasha. And in a matter of seconds, her clothes changed on their own. She was now wearing a plain white dress that reached her knees. Even her shoes had changed to high heels. That's a great ability. You'll never have to spend money on clothes again, Luke commented enviously. Get changed or we'll be late, Natasha said, hurrying Luke. Are you staying here? Luke asked as he took the suit out of its cover. He wanted some privacy. It was already strange enough to change in the school principal's office. Natasha smiled slightly and decided to hold back a teasing remark since they were running late. She got up from the couch and left the office. A few minutes later, Luke walked out of the office already changed. Natasha looked at him with curiosity. It was the first time she had seen Luke dressed so elegantly. Luke's tuxedo was a pristine white, tailor-made, with a red bow tie at the neck that stood out elegantly against the light fabric. A white carnation was pinned to the lapel of the suit. The only black item he wore was his leather shoes. It suits him well, thought Natasha as she observed Luke. The contrast with his light brown hair and blue eyes made him stand out even more, and the white color accentuated his height, which had reached 182 cm. However, Natasha didn't say anything. It wasn't her style to compliment others. Shall we go? Luke asked, raising an eyebrow as he looked at Natasha, who had been silently staring at him for several seconds. Yes, let's go, Natasha said, starting to walk toward the ballroom. When they arrived at the double doors, Luke stopped Natasha, who was about to open them. Without offering any explanation, he placed his ear against the door to listen more closely. Larissa is giving the speech. This will be a good time to enter, Luke thought as he opened the door as slowly and quietly as possible. He really doesn't like being the center of attention, Natasha thought, following Luke. Thanks to how stealthy they were, and the fact that everyone was listening and looking toward the center of the stage, no one noticed Luke's arrival as he quickly made his way to an empty table in the corner. However, the place was full of outcasts with enhanced senses. They noticed the intrusion of 2 new people. Several turned their gazes from the stage to look at Luke. That's your friend Luke, right? Vincent asked, looking at Luke from 3 tables away. Yes, that's him, Xavier replied with a strange expression. He knew Luke, his best friend, and he must be having all the attention he was getting. His appearance is good. So is his aura, commented Esthenon. Well, it's to be expected from the boy who killed Atlas, he added with a certain tone of respect. Even he hadn't lived more than 100 years like Atlas. Several murmurs about Luke's arrival were spreading across all the tables. So much for your stealth, Natasha remarked, sipping from her glass. She didn't care about the stares or the attention Luke was receiving. In fact, she thought it was a good thing. I forgot everyone here is superhuman, Luke muttered to himself. That's all, thank you for listening. Let the dance begin and enjoy the night, Larissa said, ending her speech. The music started playing again. Luke began to drink and eat the snacks in the center of his table. Within minutes, he was interrupted by a group of people approaching him. Sorry to interrupt your meal. It's a pleasure to meet you. My name is Vincent Thorpe. Xavier has told me a lot about you. My name is Esthenon Petropoulos. A pleasure to meet you, young man. Both men, who appeared young but were already over 40, extended their hands to greet Luke, who softened his expression upon realizing they were the parents of his two best friends. Pleasure to meet you, Mr. Thorpe and Mr. Petropoulos, said Luke, standing up from his seat and shaking hands with both men. Don't be so formal. You are a friend of my son. Call me Vincent. Same here, just call me Esthenon. All right, Luke nodded. After that, both men noticed Natasha, who was calmly sipping her drink and seemed more flustered than when they saw Luke. They quickly began introducing themselves to her. Meanwhile, Luke started chatting with Xavier, Ajax, and the latter's younger brother. Ajax's older brother had already met up with some old-school friends. Is it true you turned the Spellman brothers into a ball of flesh? Asked Ajax's younger brother. His name was Isidro, and he was a year younger than Ajax. Like Ajax, he wore a wool hat on his head to keep his snakes from getting out of control and turning everyone who looked at them to stone. Yeah, why? Luke asked, raising an eyebrow. Oh, so the rumors are true, said Isidro, clenching his fists with excitement for some reason. There's a rumor going around Nevermore that if someone bothers a student from Ravenloft dorm, you'll show up at night and turn them into a grotesque ball of blood, Isidro explained. Since Isidro belongs to Ravenloft dorm, the same as Luke, he feels respect and admiration for Luke. Unlike the other dorms, which feel more fear towards him, believing Luke might harm them for being from a rival dorm. There was a great rivalry between dorms, which could be seen in the Poe Cup and other competitions held throughout the year. 1. Stop bothering and go hang out with your friends, Ajax said, starting to push his brother, who complained but had no choice but to leave. You've got some fans, and it's not even because of your novels, Xavier commented with a smile. It's better to have Isidro as a fan than the fans of my novels, Luke replied, taking a sip of his drink. The fans of his books were usually very enthusiastic and often violated his personal space. On the other hand, the fans he had at Nevermore were due to his reputation for killing enemies, so their admiration was more out of respect for his strength and fear of him. They didn't approach him asking for photos or autographs. By the way, aren't you going to dance with your goth girlfriend? Xavier asked with a slight smile, looking toward a table further away. Her dress is really cool, although she didn't stick to the event's color theme, Ajax added, also looking at the peculiar Addams family table. Luke looked over at Wednesday's table and noticed she was wearing the black dress she wore in the series. It suited her well, and her lips were painted black. Wednesday noticed Luke's gaze and looked at him for a second before quickly averting her eyes. She didn't want to give any signals that might make her parents start asking annoying questions. Don't come. I don't want my parents to know about us, Wednesday said through their telepathic link without giving any further explanation. Fine, Luke replied. He couldn't deny that he was disappointed since he wanted to meet the Addams family, not just because they were his in-laws, but because of the series. But he already expected this development from Wednesday. She hates being compared to her parents and doesn't want to have a romantic story like theirs. Or rather, she doesn't want them to be right, since she found love at Nevermore just like they did. I don't like dancing, and Wednesday doesn't want to introduce me to her parents," Luke explained in response to the looks from Ajax and Xavier. "She doesn't want to introduce you to her family," Ajax and Xavier said in unison, exchanging puzzled looks. Luke nodded slightly, not giving it much importance. At this, Xavier and Ajax looked at each other again and shrugged. They knew about the strange relationship between Luke and Wednesday. Few people knew they were a couple, as they never showed any affection in public. They were often seen together during breaks and weekends, but no one was certain if they were actually dating. Xavier and Ajax, Luke's close friends, knew about it, but even they had never seen the couple show any affection, whether through kisses, hugs, or even words. "What are you doing over the vacations?" Luke asked, changing the subject. He didn't care what others thought about his relationship with Wednesday. He didn't need to show affection in public for people to know she was his girlfriend. When he's alone with her, he can kiss her and do other things, although, of course, it's not the same number of kisses and affectionate gestures as in a normal couple. "The same as always," Ajax replied, not very enthusiastic about his vacation. "The best part is not having homework and exams, but the downside is being far from his friends." "Same here. Hopefully, if my dad gets time off, we can go to Europe or something," Xavier added. "And you?" he asked. Before Luke could respond, Vicent, who had been talking to Natasha, joined their conversation. "You can come to our house, Luke. Of course, if you want to and if this lovely lady permits it," he added, glancing at Natasha with a charming smile. "Really, even despite," Luke said without finishing the sentence. He left it implied, and Vicent knew what he meant. "Yes, even despite those bold psychics," Vicent said. "It'll just be my son's friend coming to my house, nothing more. And of course, as our guest, it's our duty to ensure your protection." "Oh, that would be great," Xavier said, excited about the idea. It would be so much fun to spend the summer with Luke. As for the Spellmans, he wasn't afraid of them. He had returned during the blood moon to help his friend. "Hey, Vicent, don't get ahead of me. The Petropolis family is also inviting you to our mansion. I'm sure you'll love our statue gardens," Esthenon said, and this time Ajax seemed happy about the idea of spending the summer with a friend. As for spending the summer together, it's complicated since the Petropolis and Thorpe families live in different states. Luke was surprised by this. Both were inviting him to their homes despite knowing that the Spellmans could attack or create a rift between their families and them. "Is it because of my 3 auras?" Luke thought. That and the strength he showed when killing Atlas, Sebastian, and Sabrina, real name Ingrid. "I appreciate the invitation, but it's not the best time to discuss that. We'll decide later," Natasha responded with a professional smile, as if she had already expected this outcome. "You're right. Tonight is for having fun," Vicent said, politely bidding farewell and heading to another table to greet more acquaintances. Esthenon also said goodbye and left the table. Luke chatted a bit more with Xavier and Ajax about possible vacations, but then his friends went off to dance with their partners, who seemed annoyed after being ignored for almost 20 minutes since the dance began. A few minutes later, Veronica approached the table with her parents, Luke's aunt and uncle. They greeted him briefly and told him that he could spend the summer at the Umbrio estate again if he wished. Then they said goodbye and returned to their tables. It was the first time Luke saw his uncle speaking more respectfully and without a furrowed brow while looking at him. "Surprised, it's normal for them to want to help you after learning that you possess 3 auras. Do you know how many living psychics have 3 auras besides you? 0. Though there may be some hidden monsters with 3 auras, I doubt they came about naturally like you. But being the only one with 3 auras publicly places you in a new situation that will be very useful to us," Natasha said with a slight smile. Luke nodded. They had to take advantage of this to buy more time. If he spends the holidays with the Umbrio, Thorpe, or Petropolis families, it's less likely that the Spellmans will attack. And if they do, he will have the help of these families. It won't just be him, Natasha, and Wednesday. While he was conversing with Natasha, a man arrived at one point, introduced himself, and turned out to be a council member who invited Natasha to dance. Because of the connections and maybe in the future, it will be useful to use this man. Natasha said telepathically to Luke as she stood up and accompanied the man to the dance floor. He belongs to one of the 66 council members, Luke thought as he watched Natasha and the man walk away. It's not easy at all to be one of the 66 representatives. One thing is to work for the council in one of the available departments or in the bureaucratic side. If you're one of the 66 representatives, it means your family is powerful, and you are powerful too, as you are the leader of that family representing it in the council. You don't work for Congress. You establish the rules or influence them. Your position of power is higher. What now? Luke wondered. His two friends were dancing with their partners. His housekeeper was also dancing, and his girlfriend didn't want to talk to him because she didn't want to introduce him to her parents. Thanks for watching this episode. Like, share, and follow for more interesting stories and narrations. Thanks a lot.